everyone, and welcome back to another Navis Nobili. Today, I'm going to do a little requested video for some of the people in the Discord because I am not a big fan of certain fleets that emerged at a certain time in Battlefleet Gothic's history. And everyone has been asking, why am I hating? Why do I think it's sus? Why does everyone think Battlefleet? Why do I think that everyone who likes Battlefleet Bakka is I'm gonna say it, and I hate myself for it. A sussy Baka. I hope you guys are happy with yourselves. I feel like less of a human now. But regardless, the question of why do I hate Battlefleet Baka and what is my problem with it? Why do I think it's a bad fleet? And why do I think people who play it are bad people? There are a couple of reasons. Obviously, there's an issue of taste, right? There is an issue of individual taste, and I simply don't like it. And I don't like the way the fleet feels, and I think it was poorly actualized, right? I didn't think it would actually manifest it in a very good way. But there are also a couple of other deeper reasons that I really want to get into, and there's actually a little bit of history that we should talk about in regards to when this fleet was made, where it came from, all of that sort of stuff. First things first, recognize that Battlefleet Bakka is not actually new. It is actually a very old fleet. It did a lot of time in things like Battlefleet Gothic magazine. It was a kind of a staple in the ancillary documentation. It was like a cult following in a game that was already a cult following. So if you want to play the hipster of Battlefleet Gothic, Battlefleet Bakka is for you. But when the fleet was finally made actually official, when the 2010 FAQ rolled around, and there was a lot of push for it from the fans of this particular fleet, it was not implemented particularly well. There were a lot of confused and mixed signals that were consistently and constantly smashed together like a two opposite sides of a argument being crushed together and tried to make a cohesive whole. It is also one of the consequences of rules that have been designed that were not particularly well vetted. And a lot of the 2010 FAQ stuff was not particularly well vetted or well edited. This is a combination of a problem of not necessarily the best translation from the original language to English, and some of it was just bad writing, which is a big problem in Battlefleet Gothic. So the result were a number of fleets, and I'll actually go into the other fleets as well, because it's not just I don't like Battlefleet Bakka, it's most of the stuff that was made official in the 2010 FAQ was very poorly thought out, and it needs to be talked about and it needs to be exposed, because the problem is we're kind of stuck. It's very hard to change these things, and it's even harder to remove them. 2010 FAQ was the last time we were really allowed to add things to the game, and the current situation as it stands is that the people who really have the power to change anything are unwilling and undesirable of actually doing anything. If you ever wanted an example of the effect of unique gatekeeping, Battlefleet Gothic is a great example, because any change, you have to literally commence alligator surgery without any protection with dynamite. It's supremely hard. It has been done, and I will explain where it has been done. But let's start with Battlefleet Bakka. Battlefleet Bakka has a theme, and all of the Imperial Navy fleets have a theme. So we have like the original Battlefleet Gothic Blue Book fleet, the original one. That fleet was basically, this is a demonstration of the Imperial Navy. Ta-da. It's basically a bare bones list. It has a couple of it's one unique thing to it. It is a very standardized fleet. You can do almost anything with it. It is the jack of all trades of the entire Imperial Navy design. It is what all of them are based on. So it is a basically people like to call it a bread and butter list. I think that's very accurate, but it's also still very good for use in general play. I can make, as I have, I can make a Imperial Navy fleet competitive against any fleet in the game just by using the standard Gothic sector fleet. Now, if you go into Sigmatum Solar, there is a theme there, which is very battle cruiser heavy. You only have to take one cruiser to take a battle cruiser, which means you can min-max take a bunch of light cruisers and take a whole bunch of battle cruisers, which is a very fun way to play the game. You also have access to really, really powerful battleship alternatives to the standard Emperor and Retribution options. And it's a punchier fleet that's a little more kind of tilted towards the lance and away from the battery. There is Segment of Obscurus, which is a thematic fleet that uses grand cruisers as opposed to battle cruisers, for their really heavy stuff, and it's a far more upfront brawling sort of fleet. And then you have the other thematics like the Reserve Fleet and Battlefleet Cadia. But the theme of Baka has always been one very important element, and it was the way it was supposed to be from the beginning, which is this fleet does not use carriers. Okay? This is basically the argument in the late stages of World War II, World War I, and early stages of World War II, which were the Admiralty arguing over, do we go with big guns or do we go with carriers? Okay? This is actually reminiscent of an actual historical argument in modern navies at the time. And while all of the other Imperial navies were supposed to be the representation of the implementation of carriers to a limited extent, Imperial Navy carriers are actually kind of mediocre in the grand scheme of Battlefleet Gothic. But in the case of the Baka sector, it was supposed to be no carriers. Carriers were an abnormality, and they were even frowned upon if you took one. There were some, but they were very rare. Now, this is made up for by all of the ships in the fleet being able to take improved or more turret value, okay, to make up for the fact that they don't have interceptors. Now, this in concept is really cool. I love this concept, all right, solely on the basis of it's just fun, right? It's a disregard of the attack craft. We just want bigger guns. We want all of the guns. I just want to take, nothing but things that go boom, right? Really exciting concepts. Now, the problem is, in the implementation of the Baka sector fleet list that emerged in 2010, this concept, this theme, this fluffy element, which absolutely would give your ships a disadvantage for a benefit elsewhere, because having more turrets makes you better defended also against boarding actions. Boarding a Baka sector fleet should be painful, because when you are the defender, you add your turret value to your boarding value. Unfortunately, in the construction of the fleet, it did not emerge that way. Now, I have said in the past that your standard 1500 point list up to potentially 2000, your golden ratio of not the ratio, the golden number of launch capacity is 8. That usually can give you enough maneuverability to function effectively without just being steamrolled by an enemy who has potentially more. It gives you just enough ability to compete. Now, you would imagine that the Baka sector fleet list would prevent you from taking that 8. You should be heavily restricted or generally have none. It does not. And in fact, it is a critical consequence of this fleet list that you can actually take just as many just as many carriers as any other fleet, because they forget a lot of very important elements of the mechanics of the game. So let's begin by looking at the actual ships of this particular fleet list that are unique to this fleet list. The first and most important is, of course, you can take an Emperor battleship. Yes, you have to spend 200 points to get the Admiral, but it has to be a 1,500 point list or higher. So if you're going for a 2,000 point game, 200 points for a commander is not that much. Yes, he's the cost himself of a he himself is the cost of a battleship. We can actually go up to Lord Admiral here in a moment. Here, let me quickly click up and let me show you his rules to show you just what you're getting for him. So Lord Admiral Wraith, he's LD10, he's 200 points. Your standard LD10 Solar Admiral is already 150. Now, he is coming in on an Emperor, which means his Leadership 10 is worthless. Let's make that point abundantly clear. His Leadership 10 value is useless. That you're not really getting any benefits from him. But the real important element is he comes with 2 rerolls. If you look down over here, he already gets 75. All right. So if you were taking a standard Admiral, right, for LD9 and putting him on an Emperor to get that LD10, there's only a 25 point difference here. So already he's already overcosted. Now, also, his crew is honored and inspired, so they get +1 to defending against boarding actions. That is great. That's a great benefit. Excellent thing. So, it is an important point that he's expensive, but he's worth his points. Okay? And here's the Emperor battleship, Dominus Astra. What are the actual rules? Blah, 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 blah. This is a lot of fluff. So, in effect, Baka fleets may only field a single Emperor battleship, and only as reserve unless Admiral Wraith leads the fleet, in which case it is his battleship. Now, an important thing to point out, if you are bringing this Emperor, and Admiral Wraith leads the fleet, according to these rules, it is not a reserve ship. Okay? That's important. This is not a reserve vessel. It can benefit from the Baka sector rules. You can buy turrets, okay? And you can get this thing 6 turrets. That's an incredible upgrade. Yep, as you can see right here. So it is an important point that Emperor is already overpowered. If you're going in with a 2,000 point list, there's no reason not to take him. 1,500 points is probably too expensive. But still, it is a excellent ship, and it's not a bad option. And if you take an Emperor, guess what? You no longer have the negative of low launch capacity. It has launch capacity 8. So this ship right here invalidates the entire purpose of this fleet. Simply having this Emperor as an option. Okay? Now, 1,500 points or less, it's expensive, fair, but why is it even an option? Now, I've talked with a lot of the old farts of the hobby, and they agree this should have been an Oberon. And if it was an Oberon, it would be fine. An Oberon only has launch capacity 4. It's far more shooty. It's more thematic for the fleet. But that alone, the ability to take an Emperor in the Baka sector fleet, invalidates the very purpose of the fleet itself. Now, let's move on to the next invalidation of this purpose of a no-carrier fleet. Right here, if we just scroll down to the battlecruiser section, you will find the one battlecruiser that I hate the most of all, because it just doesn't make any sense to exist. The Dominion class battlecruiser. This vessel should not exist. This is literally somebody who had a carrier bay and a lance bay and wanted to use them on one of his hulls, and it didn't have enough to make another ship. Okay? This vessel should not exist. Mostly because this is unique to Baka, which should not have carriers. It's a standard battle cruiser, which means if I take 4 cruisers, I can take 2 Dominions, which renders the problems of my launch capacity moot. And it is a failure of a design. The whole thematic nature of the ship ruins the point of Baka. So this ship, if it simply didn't exist, would make Baka more acceptable to me as a thematic element to the fleet. This is Or even if they restricted it to, you may take one. Even then, I would say no. Because again, there shouldn't be carriers in this fleet. The theme is destroyed. And ultimately, the only saving grace of this vessel is that it is available only in Baka. You can reserve it in, but it's an expensive ship to reserve in, because if it were available to everybody, it would invalidate the Mars. Nobody would take the Mars ever. Okay. The final, no, not the final, the penultimate problem of the fleet is in the reserve section. You can take the Jovian class battlecruiser. This is another, I have a cruiser hull, but too many carrier bays. I don't have enough battery bays to make a dominator, a dictator or a Mars. So let me scroll up to it. I hate this thing so much. This thing people have been asking for this who don't realize why it shouldn't exist. If I can only get to it. Come on, where are you? It's horribly here. The Jovian class battlecruiser. It's just a Styx. That's really what it is. This is a Styx, an Imperial Styx. Okay? It should not exist. Principally because, again, it's a reserve craft. All you need are three cruisers of any variety, and you can just plop this thing in and have launch capacity 6 in a fleet that is ostensibly not supposed to have launch capacity. Okay? It is a violation of the convention, of the design, and the spirit of the fleet. Okay, and the final nail in the coffin is down here in reserve rules. Oh, sorry, it'd be up here in reserve rules. For Battlefleet Bakka, this is the final thing that just gives me an absolute headache. All right. Ships from any Imperial Navy fleet list may be used as reserved, with one reserve cruiser, battlecruiser, or grand cruiser for every 3 Baka cruisers, one reserve ship for every 3 battleships, etc. There are no restrictions whatsoever. Okay? No restrictions at all for taking the Dictator, the Mars, or the Exorcist. You can take carriers from other fleets in Battlefleet Bakka. Yes, they can't buy extra turrets. Who cares? You can just take carriers for a 1-to-3 ratio, which is easy. It is witheringly easy because you have access to very good standard cruisers and light cruisers. The whole purpose of this fleet is invalidated solely by the reserve rules, but it's even worse invalidated by the presence of the Jovian, the presence of the Dominion. If this Emperor was turned to Oberon, it would be fine. If you had to pay a humongous premium just to get launch capacity 4, then it would make this nice, thematic, a nice and crunchy list that would have heavy restrictions on what you can take, and it would make you work around your restrictions. In this fleet, there are no restrictions. There really aren't. The restrictions don't exist. You can take as many carriers as you need. Yes, you're not going to be able to dominate the table with like 13 dictators, but even in a standard Imperial Navy list, you don't have to do that. You're not concerned about it because the Imperial Navy is weak on carrier craft. They're not a fleet that is designed for heavy carrier combat. This isn't chaos. So, unfortunately, okay, the reason why I hate this list is that it's set out to do something and failed at it. There are supposed to be restrictions in every Imperial Navy fleet, and every fleet really, that make you work tactically around in order for the fleet to work. And the argument of why can't you just let people have fun is because if you're playing a game, you have to follow the rules. That's how the fun is made. And the tactical workarounds in making your fleet function against adversity and its weaknesses is part of the fun. So why do I dislike Baka? Because Baka is fan wankery. It's literally, I want to have everything. with no restrictions, when the original intent was it was a heavily restricted fleet. Now, how would I fix it? I already mentioned, remove the Jovian. Period. The Jovian should not exist as a ship at all. Imperial Navy are not a carrier-centric fleet. Second, remove the Dominion completely from this list. Your options for battlecruiser should be the Mercury, the Armageddon, and maybe the Overlord. I don't even know why the Overlord isn't in here. It's ostensibly the most shooty option for, when it comes to guns in the battlecruiser slot, mostly because they're probably trying to justify the existence of this pathetic ship here, the Mercury. Yes, I am overtly going to come out and say the Mercury should not exist either. It's more thematic for this list because it's a gunship, but it shouldn't exist, period. This thing is desperately trying to compete with a superior vessel, the Overlord and the Mars. Okay? I'm going to look at the rules really quick here. Look at this. Its 45 centimeter weapons batteries can increase their range to 60 centimeters for 10 points, giving you strength 10. It's basically supposed to be a battlecruiser tyrant. And because of this, you can replace your Nova Cannon with strength 6 torpedoes. It basically invalidates the Overlord. This ship should not exist. This is what I talk about when you are designing a new ship. You cannot replace anything that's already made because ultimately what you're doing is you're oversaturating the game. This ship should not exist. This is the problem of permitting the fans making things without oversight. And this ship is awful because, frankly, the Overlord is fine and good enough for this list. So yeah, sorry, I had to rant about the Mercury because it's, if anything, more offensive than the Dominion. At least the Dominion doesn't deliberately seek to erase another ship. Oh, it kind of does with the Mars, but still. Your only option should be the Overlord and the Armageddon. Period. The best way to fix this, again, removal of the Jovian, removal of the Dominion, make the Emperor option a Oberon, and put in the reserves that you may not, under any circumstance, take a reserve vessel with a carrier vessel with reserves. You are restricted at maximum at any point level to launch capacity 4 from a Oberon battleship. That would restore the original intent of this list. It would make it far, far more thematic and more interesting to play, and it would force the player to actually take tactical choices to mitigate a weakness in their fleet. This fleet has no weakness. I could come in with a carrier list. I am at a disadvantage with carriers. I am at a disadvantage with boarding. Those are two areas that the Imperial Navy are intrinsically weak at. Okay? And this fleet works to invalidate those weaknesses. It is the same reason why so much of the fleet rules of XR are terrible. It invalidates the weaknesses of the fleet. You are no longer making tactical decisions. You are simply spooging things onto the board in any way you like, which means you don't have to actually think. It's just bumper cars in space. So this is a rant, and I recognize that, but this is why I hate Baka. It is a tactical equivalent of children playing checkers with the same color pieces. It makes no rational sense when compared to the other fleets. It has no weaknesses. It doesn't follow its theme. It's a failure of a list. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of my system, we're going to talk about the other things that the 2010 FAQ screwed up. The other one, I'm going to quickly do a search here. Inquisition. The Inquisition rules were poorly written to begin with, and they were not fixed in the 2010 FAQ. Principally because with the way they are written, thankfully this is being fixed, and this is a good thing. It is not possible to field a Grey Knights battle barge at all because of the way the ships are identified in the rules. You can only take, if you want to take only a pure Grey Knights fleet, it is impossible to take the battle barge, even if it specifically says you're supposed to be able to. Now, thankfully, this is being fixed. Okay? This is an example of a mistake that is being fixed. Let's all be thankful to Horizon. Let's be thankful to Hainscroft, who is making this document. Let's be thankful to the High Lords who reviewed the new fleet list. It does exist. It will be added. You can take a Grey Knights pure fleet. But the fact that this was a mistake, it was never fixed until now. Oh my God, 14 years later, it has been fixed. But let's talk about another area that is just a pain. So the final area that I'm going to talk about in this particular regard is the fleet list for the Orc Clans. Now, people have assured me, and you know what? I appreciate this. People have been able to get the Orc Clans to work. The problem is the write-up for this is very poor and difficult to understand. And there's also one very important problem with the Orc Clans. It was supposed to be a much more small ship oriented fleet. You're supposed to have a lot more escorts. You're supposed to have a lot more light cruises and a lot of stuff. But because the individual upgrades here are so expensive, you actually end up with a smaller fleet if you take these upgrades. You are putting a ton of, you're putting a ton of points just into the upgrades of the ship. And because each detachment, so to speak, is its own little fleet, it's just very complex to build. It could have been worded better. I like the idea of it. Unfortunately, it didn't get written very well. And this is another case of what happens when you have the fans write something and it's not reviewed and edited and reviewed again and again and again, like in an official measure that a company would normally do. This really does need to be gone through again, rewritten in a way that makes better sense so it can actually be played more effectively. But the idea is good, but it's just awfully written, and it's hard to make. I have problems figuring out how the hell this is supposed to work. But you also find it's very restrictive in the, in point scales, on all point scales. So, and really the only point to play the clan list is to take advantage of some of these upgrades that are really pricey, right? They're really expensive. So why not just settle with an easier to build fleet and go with the Orc Wog list, which has basically everything except for the clan rules. But you can field more ships in the end because you're not wasting points on upgrades. So it's a trade-off that wasn't meant to be, because the clan lists were supposed to have more ships on the table ultimately, and it just turns out to not, because everything is expensive. So it's a failure. So it's a failure of a list too. It really needs to be reworked. But this, getting back to Baka, I made it very abundantly clear. This list it's functional, you can play it. It's clear in its rules. It just fails in its theme. It's meant to have a theme, and it fails at it. It fails at it because people did not want to adhere to what they initially desired in the fleet, or what the fleet was originally meant to be. People came in and said, yeah, but I'm always losing without my carriers. I need something, right? And the answer is, if you aren't winning because you don't have carrier capacity, you have to find a workaround. You have to find a way to make it work. And nobody wanted to, so instead they added in a bunch of ships that just took away the flavor of the fleet and make it just like every other Imperial Navy fleet with better rules. Which is why whenever I beat the shit out of a Baka fleet, it makes me feel really good, because I know that I am actually facing the most broken list of all the Imperial Navy lists, and I am doing it with something that is not broken, or even better, something that's actually weaker on average. Beating up Baka as orcs makes me feel incredible. Beating up Baka as Tau makes me feel great because I am happy to know that my tactical decisions can overcome the poor decision making of people who built this list. And that makes me feel good. I really hope one day the community is willing to reapproach Baka and fix this list because it has the opportunity to be a phenomenal list. A really cool, very thematic list that has a glaring weakness that can be exploited, forcing the Imperial player to tactically change their decision making. Actually force them to not just play like a super fleet that can just come in and beat up everything it wants. So overall, so don't start rambling over and over and over again. I am going to finish this video with a final note, and it is not related to really anything. I know I have not been making a lot of content recently, mostly because as my child gets closer to their birth date, I have taken a lot of time to reconnect with a lot of friends, friends from even before college. I have been taking a lot of time to get ready for things for the baby, and that obviously has a greater priority to me than anything here. I'm going to do my best to keep making content, probably at a slower rate, because obviously taking care of a baby matters more. But I wanted to give this tiny little piece of life advice to everyone. I know that thanks to the analytics that come out of YouTube, that the majority of the people who watch this are unironically in their 30s and 40s, but this is useful information even to the younger crowd. Take your time and go back and say hi to all of your friends from earlier parts in your life. And I mean that. Go back and, go talk to your old college buddies. Go talk to your friends in high school. Go talk to your friends in grade school. You will be surprised at how much they have grown and how much they changed. Some of them may have become insufferable. I know for a fact that a couple of mine definitely have become unpleasant, but a lot of them are like more refined versions of the people that I had very strong friendships with. And reconnecting with your past is always enlightening. And sometimes it can be very rewarding. So I highly recommend it. Take a time. Take time to go and say hi. Maybe they need a friend that, you know, from back in their past too. Take the opportunity. Go say hi. See how they're doing. It really worked out well for me. Okay, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all again in the next vid.